On a rainy October afternoon in 2023, Dr. Amanda Foster, a professor of American history at Boston University, discovered what would become one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in a century-old criminal investigation. The small antique shop on Beacon Street had been her refuge from academic pressures for years, and the elderly proprietor, Mr. Samuel Whitman, often saved interesting historical items for her consideration. This came from an estate in Salem, Whitman explained as he carefully unwrapped an ornate wooden frame. The family was cleaning out their grandmother's attic and wanted to get rid of everything quickly. Said the old woman never talked about her childhood, claimed it was too painful to remember. The photograph inside the frame showed a formal Victorian family portrait, typical of the 1890s era that Dr. Foster specialized in studying. The image appeared to document a prosperous American family from 1895, posed in what was clearly their well-appointed parlor. The father stood behind his seated wife, both dressed in the formal attire characteristic of the Victorian middle class. 3 children, ranging in age from approximately 8 to 16, were positioned around their parents in the carefully composed arrangement favored by portrait photographers of the era. At first glance, everything about the photograph seemed perfectly normal for its time period. The clothing, furniture, and photographic techniques all aligned with standard practices of 1895 portrait photography. The family's expressions showed the typical seriousness expected in formal Victorian portraiture, when long exposure times made natural smiles nearly impossible to capture. Dr. Foster purchased the photograph for $65, primarily for its value as a teaching tool in her Victorian America courses. She planned to use it as an example of middle-class domestic life during the late 19th century, never suspecting that this seemingly ordinary family portrait would soon reveal evidence of crimes that had remained hidden for over 128 years. That evening, as she prepared to catalog the photograph for her academic collection, Dr. Foster would make a discovery that would transform her understanding of Victorian family life and launch an investigation into one of the most disturbing criminal cases in American history. Back in her home office near Boston University, Dr. Foster began her standard documentation process for the 1895 photograph. Using professional lighting and a high-resolution digital camera, she captured detailed images of the portrait for her academic archive. Victorian family photographs were her specialty, and she had developed an expert eye for the subtle details that revealed information about social class, regional customs, and family dynamics. The photograph measured 12 by 16 inches, mounted in an elaborate carved wooden frame that suggested the family's comfortable financial circumstances. The backdrop showed a typical Victorian parlor, complete with ornate wallpaper, heavy drapery, and the kind of substantial furniture that demonstrated respectability and permanence in late 19th century America. As Dr. Foster examined the image under magnification, cataloging the details of clothing and decor that would be useful for her students, her attention was drawn to the wall decorations behind the family. Victorian homes were known for their elaborate wall treatments, and this parlor displayed the typical collection of framed items, decorative plates, and religious imagery common to the era. But as her magnifying glass moved across the wall behind the father's left shoulder, Dr. Foster's breath caught in her throat. Hanging among the conventional Victorian wall decorations was something that should never have been displayed in a respectable family home. What appeared to be a collection of human scalps mounted and framed like hunting trophies. The scalps were arranged in a neat row, each one carefully preserved and displayed with the same attention to presentation that the family had given to their other wall decorations. The hair textures and colors varied, suggesting they had come from different individuals, and the professional mounting indicated that someone had taken considerable care in their preservation and display. Dr. Foster's hands trembled as she repositioned the magnifying glass, hoping she had misidentified the objects. But there was no mistaking what she was seeing. A Victorian family had posed for their formal portrait in a room decorated with what appeared to be human remains, displayed as casually as family photographs or religious artwork. The implications were staggering, and Dr. Foster realized she was looking at potential evidence of multiple murders that had been documented in a family portrait over a century ago. Dr. Foster immediately contacted Dr. Robert Chen, a forensic anthropologist at Harvard Medical School, who specialized in historical evidence analysis. When Dr. Chen arrived at her office the following morning, his examination of the photograph under professional magnification equipment confirmed her worst fears. "These are definitely human scalps," Dr. Chen stated after a thorough analysis. The hair patterns, the way they've been preserved and mounted, the display arrangement, everything indicates that someone took considerable care in collecting and presenting these as trophies. His professional demeanor couldn't mask his obvious disturbed reaction to the discovery. The forensic analysis revealed additional disturbing details. The scalps showed different hair textures and colors, ranging from blonde to black, with both straight and curly patterns represented. The varied characteristics suggested the victims had been of different ages and possibly different ethnicities, indicating a systematic pattern of violence rather than isolated incidents. Most chilling was Dr. Chen's assessment of the preservation techniques. Whoever prepared these scalps had considerable knowledge of taxidermy and preservation methods. He explained, "This wasn't the work of someone acting in a moment of passion. This represents planned, methodical collection and display over an extended period of time." Research into 1890s photography practices confirmed that families typically chose to display their most prized possessions during formal portrait sessions, wanting to demonstrate their prosperity and social status for posterity. The fact that this family had chosen to include the scalp collection in their formal portrait suggested they felt no shame or fear about their presence, possibly indicating that the crimes had gone undetected by local law enforcement. Dr. Foster's investigation into the photograph's provenance revealed it had come from the estate of Margaret Blackwood, who had died at age 94 in Salem, Massachusetts. Estate records showed that Margaret had been the youngest child in the original 1895 photograph, the 8-year-old girl standing beside her mother's chair. The realization that one of the children in the photograph had lived until 2023, taking the family's secret to her grave, added another layer of horror to the discovery. Margaret Blackwood had spent nearly a century knowing the truth about what hung on her family's wall, yet had never reported the crimes or sought justice for the victims. Dr. Foster's discovery prompted the Massachusetts State Police to open a formal investigation into what they designated as the Salem Scalp Collection case. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who specialized in historical cold cases, began by examining missing persons records from Essex County during the 1890s. Searching for patterns that might connect to the evidence in the photograph. The investigation revealed a disturbing number of unexplained disappearances in the Salem area between 1890 and 1900. Local newspaper archives documented at least 12 cases of individuals who had vanished without trace. Their disappearances spread across a decade-long period that coincided with the time frame suggested by the family portrait. The missing persons included travelers passing through Salem, local residents from neighboring towns, and several individuals described in contemporary accounts as transients or wanderers, people whose disappearances might not have generated intensive police investigation during the 1890s. The varied backgrounds of the missing persons aligned with Dr. Chen's analysis of the different hair types represented in the scalp collection. Most significantly, Detective Rodriguez discovered that several of the disappearances had occurred within a 5-mile radius of the Blackwood family property on the outskirts of Salem. Property records from the 1890s showed that the Blackwoods owned a substantial farm that provided both isolation for criminal activity and convenient disposal methods for evidence. Contemporary newspaper accounts painted the Blackwood family as respected members of the Salem community. Jonathan Blackwood was described as a successful livestock dealer who frequently traveled throughout New England on business, while his wife Martha was active in local church activities. Their reputation for respectability had apparently provided perfect cover for a decade-long murder spree. The investigation also revealed that Jonathan Blackwood's business activities provided numerous opportunities to encounter potential victims. As a livestock dealer, he regularly traveled to remote farms and conducted transactions with strangers who might not be missed immediately if they disappeared. His legitimate business activities gave him access to isolated locations and provided reasonable explanations for blood, tools, and other evidence that might otherwise have aroused suspicion. Detective Rodriguez's analysis of the family's financial records showed unexplained increases in wealth during the 1890s, suggesting that robbery had been a motive in at least some of the murders. The Blackwoods had clearly profited from their crimes while maintaining the facade of respectable Victorian family life. The most disturbing aspect of Detective Rodriguez's investigation involved uncovering evidence about what the Blackwood children had witnessed during their formative years. Margaret Blackwood, the youngest child in the 1895 photograph, had left behind a collection of personal papers and diaries that provided chilling insights into the family's criminal activities. Margaret's diary entries, written in her 20s and preserved among her estate papers, revealed that all 3 Blackwood children had been aware of their father's murders from early ages. Rather than being traumatized or horrified by the violence, the children had been gradually inducted into viewing the killings as normal family activities. "Father brought another one home today," read one entry from what appeared to be Margaret's teenage years. "Thomas helped him with the preparation, and Mother made sure Mary and I stayed upstairs until it was finished. The new one will look nice with the others in the parlor." The casual tone of these entries suggested that murder had become routine household business for the Blackwood family. More disturbing were Margaret's descriptions of how the scalp collection had been integrated into the family's daily life. "Visitors always comment on Father's hunting trophies," she had written. "We tell them they're from animals Father caught during his business travels. No one ever suspects the truth, and Mother says it's better that way." The diary entries also revealed that the children had been taught to view their father's victims as less than human. Father explains that the people he brings home are wanderers and criminals who won't be missed by anyone, Margaret had written. "He says we're making the world safer by removing dangerous people from society." Thomas Blackwood, the oldest son in the 1895 photograph, had apparently been trained as his father's accomplice. Margaret's writings described how Thomas had learned to assist with the murders and the subsequent preparation of the scalps, viewing these activities as valuable skills his father was teaching him for adulthood. Most chilling was the revelation that the family had planned to continue the killing tradition into the next generation. Margaret's diary contained references to discussions about which of the children would inherit Father's responsibilities and maintain the family's criminal activities after Jonathan Blackwood's death. The psychological manipulation of the children represented a level of systematic evil that extended far beyond the individual murders, creating a multi-generational criminal enterprise that could have continued indefinitely if circumstances hadn't intervened. Detective Rodriguez's investigation into the Blackwood family's fate revealed why their murder spree had ended and how they had managed to avoid detection by law enforcement. The answers lay in a series of events that had unfolded between 1895 and 1900, ultimately leading to the family's dissolution and the secret preservation of their crimes. Jonathan Blackwood's death in 1897, just 2 years after the family portrait was taken, had occurred under circumstances that contemporary newspaper accounts described as mysterious. The Salem Evening News reported that Blackwood had been found dead in his barn, apparently killed by one of his own livestock, in what was ruled an accidental death. However, modern analysis of the newspaper coverage revealed inconsistencies that suggested the official explanation had been deliberately fabricated. Witnesses had reported seeing a stranger on the Blackwood property on the night of Jonathan's death, and there had been evidence of a struggle that was inconsistent with an animal attack. More significantly, Jonathan's death had occurred shortly after one of his intended victims had escaped and possibly reported the attempted murder to authorities. Margaret's diary contained a cryptic reference to "the one who got away" and her father's increasing paranoia in the weeks before his death. The evidence suggested that Jonathan Blackwood had been killed by either a potential victim who fought back or by someone seeking revenge for previous murders. His death had effectively ended the family's killing spree, but it had also eliminated the primary witness who could have provided information about the location of victims' bodies or the full extent of the crimes. After Jonathan's death, Martha Blackwood had quickly sold the family property and moved the children to Boston, where they had assumed new identities and attempted to blend into urban anonymity. The scalp collection had been carefully packed and moved with them, suggesting that Martha had been unwilling to abandon the trophies despite the risk they represented. Thomas Blackwood, the eldest son who had been trained as his father's accomplice, had died in World War I, taking his detailed knowledge of the family's crimes to his grave. Mary, the middle child, had died of influenza in 1918. Only Margaret had survived to old age, carrying the burden of the family's secrets for over a century. The family's successful disappearance into Boston's immigrant communities had allowed them to escape investigation and had prevented law enforcement from discovering the full scope of their crimes, until the 2023 analysis of the family portrait provided the first concrete evidence of their murderous activities. The Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory applied cutting-edge forensic techniques to extract maximum information from the 1895 photograph, treating it as crucial evidence in what had become a serial murder investigation spanning over 128 years. Digital enhancement technology revealed details that had been invisible to previous generations of investigators. High-resolution scanning and computer analysis of the scalp collection visible in the photograph provided detailed information about the victims. Forensic experts were able to determine approximate ages, hair colors, and textures of at least 8 distinct scalps, each representing an individual murder. The variety in hair characteristics confirmed that the Blackwoods had killed victims of different ages and ethnicities over an extended period. Most significantly, the enhanced analysis revealed that one of the scalps displayed distinctive braiding patterns consistent with Native American hairstyling of the 1890s. This discovery prompted collaboration with tribal historians and the FBI's involvement in investigating potential hate crimes against indigenous peoples. The photographic analysis also provided crucial information about the preservation and mounting techniques used for the scalp collection. Forensic experts determined that the scalps had been treated with chemicals and mounting materials that were consistent with professional taxidermy practices of the 1890s, suggesting that Jonathan Blackwood had possessed considerable skill in specimen preparation. Perhaps most chilling was the discovery that the scalps had been arranged in chronological order, with subtle differences in preservation quality and mounting styles that suggested the collection had been accumulated over several years. The systematic nature of the display indicated that the murders had been planned and executed with methodical precision. Modern facial recognition technology was applied to the family portrait, creating detailed biometric profiles of each family member. These profiles were cross-referenced with historical records, immigration documents, and death certificates to confirm the identities of Jonathan, Martha, Thomas, Mary, and Margaret Blackwood. The forensic analysis also examined the background elements of the photograph for additional evidence. Enhancement revealed that other items on the parlor walls included what appeared to be personal effects from victims, jewelry, watches, and small valuables that had likely been taken as trophies along with the scalps. This comprehensive forensic approach transformed a single historical photograph into a detailed crime scene analysis, providing law enforcement with their most complete picture of the Blackwood family's criminal activities and the scope of their murder spree during the 1890s. Detective Rodriguez's investigation expanded to include genealogists, tribal historians, and community organizations as they worked to identify the victims represented in the Blackwood scalp collection. The process of putting names and stories to the evidence visible in the 1895 photograph became both a criminal investigation and a humanitarian effort to provide closure for families who had lost ancestors over a century ago. The Native American scalp identified through enhanced analysis prompted extensive collaboration with the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe and other New England indigenous communities. Tribal historian Joseph Running Bear worked with investigators to examine missing persons records from tribal communities during the 1890s, searching for individuals who might have encountered Jonathan Blackwood during his livestock trading activities. Our oral histories contain stories of people who went to trade with settlers and never returned home, Running Bear explained during a community meeting about the investigation. These disappearances were always attributed to accidents or getting lost. But now we understand that some of our people may have been murdered and their remains taken as trophies. The investigation also revealed that several of the hair samples visible in the photograph matched descriptions of missing persons from immigrant communities in the Boston area. Irish, Italian, and Eastern European families had reported relatives who disappeared while traveling through rural Massachusetts during the 1890s, often while seeking work or conducting business in smaller towns like Salem. Genealogist Sarah McKenzie, working pro bono for the investigation, successfully traced at least 3 of the potential victims to specific families. Her research revealed that Patrick O'Sullivan, a 32-year-old Irish immigrant, had disappeared in 1893 while traveling to Salem to purchase livestock for his small farm. His red hair and beard, described in contemporary missing person reports, matched one of the scalps clearly visible in the photograph. Similarly, McKenzie identified Maria Rossetti, a 24-year-old Italian woman who had vanished in 1894 while traveling to visit relatives in Salem. Her distinctive black curly hair, mentioned in family letters, corresponded to another scalp in the Blackwood collection. The community impact of these identifications was profound. Families who had wondered for generations about the fate of missing ancestors finally had answers, though the truth was more horrible than they had ever imagined. Memorial services were held for the identified victims, providing closure that had been denied for over 130 years. The investigation also prompted reviews of other unsolved disappearances from the 1890s throughout New England, as investigators recognized that the Blackwood case might represent only a portion of a larger pattern of violence against vulnerable populations during that era. Although all the perpetrators of the Blackwood murders had been dead for decades, the Massachusetts Attorney General's office formally recognized the investigation's findings and issued official declarations of homicide for the identified victims. This legal acknowledgement provided important validation for the families and communities affected by the century-old crimes. The investigation's conclusions were presented at a public hearing in Salem, where Detective Rodriguez outlined the evidence that had transformed a family portrait into proof of serial murder. The 1895 photograph represents one of the most significant pieces of forensic evidence in Massachusetts history, she stated. It has allowed us to solve multiple murders that were never properly investigated, and to provide answers to families who waited over 130 years for the truth. The hearing also addressed the systematic failures of 1890s law enforcement that had allowed the Blackwood murders to continue undetected. Contemporary police records showed that missing person reports had been filed for several of the victims, but investigations had been superficial and were abandoned when no immediate evidence was found. The social context of the 1890s had worked in the Blackwoods' favor, as victims from immigrant and indigenous communities were often dismissed by authorities as transients or troublemakers whose disappearances were not worthy of intensive investigation. The family's respectable appearance and community standing had provided perfect camouflage for their criminal activities. Dr. Foster's accidental discovery was officially credited with solving what became classified as Massachusetts' oldest cold case. Her expertise in Victorian history had been crucial in recognizing the significance of the photograph and understanding the social context that had allowed the crimes to occur. The Massachusetts State Police established new protocols for investigating historical cold cases, recognizing that family photographs, documents, and artifacts might contain evidence that could solve decades-old crimes. The Blackwood case became a model for applying modern forensic techniques to historical evidence. Most importantly, the investigation provided a measure of justice for victims who had been forgotten by history. Memorial plaques were installed in Salem's historic district, honoring Patrick O'Sullivan, Maria Rossetti, and the other identified victims, ensuring that their stories would be remembered alongside the community's more celebrated history. The legal resolution also included recommendations for reviewing other historical cases where evidence might have been overlooked or dismissed due to the social prejudices of earlier eras, recognizing that true justice requires acknowledging and correcting past failures of the legal system. The resolution of the Blackwood case fundamentally changed how historians, genealogists, and law enforcement professionals approached historical evidence. Dr. Foster's discovery demonstrated that seemingly innocent family artifacts could contain crucial information about crimes that had been hidden for over a century, encouraging more careful examination of historical photographs and documents. The case was featured in forensic journals worldwide as an example of how modern technology could extract evidence from historical sources. The digital enhancement techniques used to analyze the 1895 photograph established new standards for forensic photography, proving that century-old images could yield detailed information about criminal activities when properly examined. Dr. Foster returned to her teaching position at Boston University but expanded her curriculum to include forensic applications of historical research. Her course, Hidden Evidence in Historical Photography, became one of the university's most popular offerings, teaching students to look beyond the obvious subjects of historical images to examine background details that might reveal untold stories. The Massachusetts Historical Society created a permanent exhibit about the Blackwood case, using it to educate visitors about the social conditions of the 1890s that had allowed such crimes to occur unchecked. The exhibit emphasized how prejudice and social hierarchies had prevented proper investigation of crimes against marginalized communities. Detective Rodriguez established a national network of cold case investigators specializing in historical crimes, sharing the techniques developed during the Blackwood investigation with law enforcement agencies across the country. Her work led to the resolution of several other century-old cases where photographic evidence had been previously overlooked. The identified victims' families and communities used the case to highlight ongoing issues of violence against vulnerable populations. The memorial services held for Patrick O'Sullivan, Maria Rossetti, and other victims became annual events that honored both the specific individuals murdered by the Blackwoods and all victims of hate crimes and violence against minorities. Perhaps most significantly, The case demonstrated that historical justice was possible even when traditional legal remedies were no longer available. While Jonathan and Martha Blackwood could never be prosecuted for their crimes, the truth about their activities had finally been revealed, providing closure for victims' families and ensuring that their stories would not be forgotten. The 1895 family portrait, once a symbol of Victorian respectability, became a powerful reminder that appearances could deceive and that evidence of the darkest crimes might hide in the most unexpected places. The photograph now serves as both a testament to the victim's memory and a warning that justice, though delayed, can still be achieved through persistence, technology, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths about the past. Dr. Foster's final academic paper on the case concluded, "The Blackwood family photograph reminds us that every historical artifact has the potential to reveal stories that challenge our understanding of the past. Our responsibility as scholars and citizens is to approach these discoveries with both scientific rigor and human compassion, ensuring that the voices of forgotten victims are finally heard."